Sherilyn has to
Yeah.
say that at work all the time when little kids are running around screaming and there's teachers running around screaming, and it's like, those are your emotions. These are my emotions. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Bible Geeks Weekly Podcast. This is episode 146. I'm Brian Sheely.
I'm Ryan Joy.
And thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in to our 7th guided study session here in our Training Wheels series. Thanks for sticking with us on our break week last week. Today, we're going to be talking about parenting goals. I think goal setting is something that, well, obviously you and I love to talk about here on the podcast. Yeah. And parenting goals, our goals for ourselves as parents, is also an important thing for us to consider on a regular basis, maybe not even just in January.
Yeah, for sure. And being on the same page with your spouse and just thinking through what is mine to do, what is it time to do now, we often ask. And then part of that, as we'll talk about, is what isn't mine to do? What would be an inappropriate goal for me to have?
And I think that leads us into this conversation starter that we had earlier. And this was a daily download that we called The Mouth of Babes.
This is Training Wheels.
The Mouth of Babes.
Little kids don't usually have a filter for their words. Sometimes they surprise us with unexpected wisdom beyond their pint-sized proportions.
And other times, most other times, they say things in public that make you want to crawl in a hole from embarrassment.
If you don't have a budding young philosopher in the house, maybe out of the mouth of babes sounds more like a punchline than a blessing.
So how much control do we really have over what our kids say or do, despite our best efforts? As we shepherd and shape our children, it's important to accept our limitations and take responsibility for what we control.
So here's the big idea. Good parenting is a daily choice you make, not the result of your child's choices. Your success or failure as a parent doesn't depend on your kid's response.
Imagine if we judged God, the perfect father, by the same criteria. If the majority walk the broad road to destruction, does that mean God's a failure?
Of course not. People make their own decisions and are responsible for their actions. And that includes our children.
So what's your goal as a parent? We need to get clear on that before we start evaluating ourselves. For example, we aim to pass our faith to our kids like Timothy's grandmother and mother did. That's the right goal, as long as we take responsibility for the part we control.
So do your part every day, planting and watering your child's heart, and leave the growth to God. Parents aren't all-knowing masters or experts. We just have 20 or 30 more years of experience.
That's not nothing, but don't overestimate it either.
Don't feel pressured to be the father or the mother with all the answers. Instead, stay humble, offering wisdom, love, and discipline as you guide them, support them, and correct them.
So here's the big question. How will you know if you've done a good job as a parent?
So follow along with this guided study at BibleGeeks.fm/trainingwheels.
And may the Lord bless you and keep you today.
Shalom. Okay, so the big idea there is that good parenting is a daily choice you make, not the result of your child's choices. And I think that statement could be misinterpreted as a license for permissive parenting or an excuse for letting kids misbehave. And I think what we're actually saying is just the opposite.
Absolutely, the opposite.
Right. But we get ourselves into trouble when we think that parenting is about the kid's behavior. Actually, parenting is about your behavior, about my behavior as a parent, purposefully acting to shape a child's behavior. That's why it's parenting. It's about the parents. And more importantly, as we try to shape the heart from which their behavior will flow, it's going to take an intentionality and me choosing what I'm going to do. And it's a point that, of course, comes from the Bible's emphasis on personal accountability, which is what we'll talk about today quite a bit. And this point has really helped me a lot once I finally got it. It's just helpful to realize that when my focus is on controlling my kids' behavior, it takes away my power to create positive change. I might find empty vanity in their good actions or frustration in their bad actions. I might get snagged. I might react without a clear way forward. Every time they say or do something they shouldn't, they've made me a failure. Like, what kind of parent lets this happen? This bathroom accident or this disobedience or whatever it is. And it will happen is the reality. This is training, and that means they're going to make a wrong choice, and then if we're focusing on our actions, we'll use those missteps to teach and to correct rather than blowing up at them or spiraling into frustration. And so that's the point. Keep your attention on your parenting. What should you do next about this?
Yeah, I think that's all a really helpful starting point here, is thinking about your choices, your responsibility. And that leads to the big question, which is how will you know if you've done a good job as a parent? And a popular question that we love to ask around our office is, what does done look like? Quote unquote done. What does that look like? Because sometimes us as coders, we have a very different definition of what done looks like than the managers do. And so we're always having to sync up with each other and make sure that we're all on the same page, we're working off the same playbook. And I think as parents, we need to have a definition of good parenting that syncs up with the master's definition of good parenting. And it kind of reminds me of Luke 17, as Jesus would say, so you also, when you have done all that you were commanded, say, we are unworthy servants. We have only done what was our duty. What is our responsibility as parents? What is our job as parents? What part do we play in making sure the job of parenting is done well? And I think it's easy for us to think about how, we might have done a good job by people praising us or when everything works out well. But that kind of sets us up for failure when things don't go well or our kids don't follow our lead, like Proverbs 22 verse 6 talks about. We might find ourselves in the depth of despair if we define parenting, good parenting, as what happens when everything works out well. So we need to make sure that we've got a good definition, a good working definition of what does done look like in our parenting.
Yeah, and whenever you said, what does done look like, I immediately started thinking about, what does that finished product of our child look like? But of course, we don't control all of those factors.
No, we do not.
And so I think that where you actually took the question is a more profitable discussion, which is, what does good parenting look like? Yeah. What is my job to do? And God is going to do a lot of this work for us also if we're planting his word and we're praying to him. And then our kids will have a part in who they become.
Yeah, and so maybe let's lighten the mood just ever so slightly with an icebreaker question. And the question this week is, what is the most embarrassing thing your child has said or done in public? And I guess you get to go first on this one, so let her rip.
Yeah, here's one that is uncomfortable to even think back to. Right after moving here, we were at an elder's home, or more accurately, I think, an elder's wife's home, because she just kept this house immaculately. And she was a wonderful woman, and she just did things well. And that made it all the worse when our toddler toddled out of the bathroom with her pants around her ankles, asking for help in the bathroom. And I won't go into any more of it than that, but to say that my wife, who is not easily ruffled by this sort of thing, was mortified.
Yeah. Well, it's odd that we have chosen the same type of event, but as I was thinking about this, Ashlyn was really little, and we went to a really fancy restaurant for my birthday. And here we have, a not so newborn, less than 1 year old baby, and we had a giant diaper explosion in the middle of the restaurant on my white button-down shirt on my birthday. I mean, nothing says embarrassment like walking to the bathroom of a steakhouse that's really nice and really expensive and having poop all over you. I mean, I went there, so this is where we went. It was embarrassing. It was mortifying. I will never forget how this happy occasion just turned into a horrifying scene, just in the blink of an eye.
It's funny. I remember hearing you talk about that when it happened over at Fleming's.
So good. Anyway,
that's funny.
It is funny after the fact to be mortified by your children, but of course, in the moment, man, nothing is worse than feeling all of those eyeballs on you, for sure.
Yes.
All right, so let's get into our first segment here, and that is Jesus Said. And so we're in Matthew chapter 7, verses 12 to 27, where Jesus has sort of the conclusion of the Sermon on the Mount here, and he ends this whole sermon with the famous words about the wise man and the foolish man. And he starts out, though, this conversation in the reading that we're going to talk about here by saying, whatever you wish others would do to you, do also for them, for this is the law and the prophets enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter by it are many. For the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. So he's laying out some truth bombs to us about personal responsibility, the way we treat other people. But then he starts talking about trees and false prophets and how God knows who people are, and he's going to punish them for their deeds and what they do. And we also can know people. We can know who people are by the things that they do, and God is going to judge us. And so if we want to make sure that we stand the test of God's judgment, then we need to found ourselves on the rock. We need to have Jesus and his words, obedience to those words as the foundation of everything we do, the bedrock of who we are. And so thinking about this statement here that Jesus kind of closes up the Sermon on the Mount with, what do you learn about parenting? And what do you specifically learn about our responsibility in parenting?
Yeah, I'll title my answer, Mi Casa es Mi Casa.
I don't think that's how it goes.
No. But we're all building our own houses. In some way, I think it can maybe feel like an extended family is just one big shanty town with one shack built on top of another. Like we're just building our own wing of structures out one side of our parents' homes. And maybe our kids are like building their lives as an extension or an addition on our house. But actually, we each find our own plot of land and build a life for ourselves. And Jesus is very clear about that as you go through this section of the close of the Sermon on the Mount. In other words, we get to choose, build on sand or build on rock, go the broad way, go the narrow way. We have the power to do what Jesus says. And the Greek word for do is used 11 times in these verses and is clearly the main point. Jesus wants us to take everything he's just said, all of this stuff from the Sermon on the Mount about anger and reconciliation, hypocrisy, anxiety, money, all of it, and actually live that way. Now, just start doing these things that you've just heard me talk about. And of course, that would apply beyond just his words here. The point is bigger than that. But I think sometimes the momentum of our circumstances or our past choices might feel overwhelming. Maybe what our parents did or what our upbringing was like or the way we've just always done things. Change is hard. And yet it's clear Jesus wants us to know we can choose differently. He's trying to direct us to responsibility so that we can embrace this truth that we have the power to do something about our lives. And in regards to my parenting, I can change the way I handle my anger or my discipline or my emphasis on the Lord in our conversations. I can live the golden rule towards my kids. Maybe I put the phone down and I listen better or whatever that means. Jesus is teaching us here that the difference between the one who stands and the one who falls won't come from the circumstances of my life, but from the choice to do what he teaches. And I think that shows up in our parenting all the time because it shows up in everything we do all the time. And parenting is just woven into our walk with Christ and our daily life choices.
Yeah. I love how you said that change is hard. Because isn't it? I mean, it is so easy for us to just kind of follow the same traditional path that we've always gone down. But we really do have to change the way we handle all of these things. We have to make sure that we are submitting our will to the Father's will in how we parent and how we lead and how we answer difficult situations and all these things. I mean, yeah, it's just about laying down our will for what he wants from us and having a goal of doing what God wants you to do in parenting. That's a pretty good goal, I think, off the bat. And so I was thinking here about how we've said this before in the past, but expectations are resentments waiting to happen. And I think that's what Jesus is pointing our mind's eye to here. The things that we expect from others. That's kind of where I landed when he starts this thing out by saying, so whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them. For this is the law and the prophets. Of course, the golden rule, but we expect people to treat us respectfully and mercifully and graciously and with a whole lot of understanding. Like, that's what we want from other people. We expect that. And I think Jesus is saying, whatever you're looking for from other people, that's what you need to be doing. But I don't think Jesus here is giving us like the remote control to somehow robotically manipulate people so that they would do those things. It's like you look at those people and you see what you would want them to do. They may never do those things. You may never have control over those people to make them act that way toward you. But what you can control is how you act. And if you sit around all day just wishing that people would be better or do better, I think we're all in for a rude awakening because we have no control over that. And so he does point out, though, that we have control over ourselves. We can be respectful. We can be merciful. We can be gracious. We can be understanding toward other people. And then we can model that for them, even if they never reciprocate it back to us. And thinking about parenting, it's unhealthy for me to always be pointing to what everyone else should be doing and what everyone else should be responsible for without thinking about myself. And it can be distracting and demoralizing. Have I added a new challenge for myself by coupling my definition of self-worth, basically deriving that from the choices that my daughter makes? Do I define my job as parenting all based on the things that she does and really nothing about what I've done or what I've accomplished or the responsibility that I've taken on? And so am I doing my best? Am I pulling my weight in the relationship? And if so, then I think I've done the job of planting and watering, and I need to leave the growth to God and realize that, yeah, I've done what I could. And it's a tough reminder, but it'll keep us from resenting ourselves or maybe our kids someday when we just realize that everyone is their own person and they're going to be responsible for themselves. I just need to do what I need to do.
Yeah, and putting the 2 points, the point that I made and the point that you made together, it makes me think back to earlier in the sermon whenever Jesus talks about taking the log out of your own eye before you go and try to take the little splinter out of people's eyes. And if you think about how tough the job is, the log that I have in my own eye,
right?
I have my hands full focusing on that and trying to do me well. And I don't mean that to say, don't be concerned about other people or, it's you just mind your own business and stay out of everybody else's. Like we're not looking out for each other, but at a certain level, that's what Jesus is saying is you have your hands full and first, and not only first in chronological order, but in priority.
Right.
Keep your attention on yourself and on changing the things you need to change and doing the things you need to do. And then secondarily, you can help other people. And certainly there's quite a bit of responsibility to focus on our kids and shaping them. But again, the more we can keep that on what is mine to do right now to shape this child into who they need to be, the better off we'll be.
Yeah. It's such a clarifying way of wiping away all of the unspoken expectations and the frustrations that are just going to come by just focusing on what it is that you can control. And no matter whether you're talking about parenting or any other relationship, that's just a really helpful reminder. I heard it said once that those are your emotions and these are my emotions. Like Sherilyn has to say that at work all the time when little kids are running around screaming and there's teachers running around screaming, and it's like, those are your emotions. These are my emotions. And I've said that myself, and it is really helpful. It's like, this is what I can control. I can't do anything about the storm that's going on in your life right now.
Yeah. That's so easy to internalize. There's a difference between empathy and internalizing someone else's whole psyche.
Yeah, you can't really pull someone out of a pit if you've already fallen into it yourself. So let's move on to our second segment here on the episode. And that is, do you understand?
Do you understand anything they're saying?
Oh, yes, Master Luke. Remember that I am fluent in over 6 million forms of
What are you telling them?
Hello, I think.
Hello, I think. So here we are in Ezekiel 18. And I love this chapter. It just seems to come out of the blue, and something that I reference a lot in thinking about personal responsibility, because that's really what God is focused on here. He's focused on personal responsibility. He's focused on getting the people to see, no, you don't get to blame shift. You don't get to deflect. You've got to focus on your responsibility here. And we're thinking about parenting. How can embracing what Ezekiel 18 talks about here, how can that affect our view of our kids? How can that change our view of ourselves as parents? Where do we put our attention? Where do we put our focus? What is our goal as parents as we think about the responsibility that we have here? And so As we're reading this together, Ezekiel 18, what do you find here that helps you understand what God is telling us about personal responsibility?
Well, I think he tells us to keep our eye on the ball, so to speak. I think if you look at this chapter, it's just so masterfully put together. The beginning kind of sets out this idea from a proverb that they would say, and he comes to a great conclusion, a powerful truth at the end. And then in between, there's all these scenarios that he keeps outlining.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's worthwhile maybe to read the first couple verses here, maybe verses 2-4, as we get started. Ezekiel asks the people, speaking for the Lord, "What do you mean by repeating this proverb concerning the land of Israel?" So this is what they were saying to each other. "The fathers have eaten sour grapes, and the children's teeth are set on edge." And that's evidently a proverb that was also being spoken back in Palestine, where Jeremiah was, because he quotes it too.
Uh-huh.
Ezekiel's here with the exiles, and they're saying it to each other. Like, it doesn't make any sense. The fathers ate the sour grapes. Why are the children's teeth set on edge? And God says, "As I live, declares the Lord God, this proverb shall no more be used by you in Israel. Behold, all souls are mine." It's so powerful. All lives are mine. All souls are mine. The soul of the Father, as well as the soul of the Son, is mine. The soul who sins shall die.
I love that. He's like basically telling them, knock it off.
Yeah, exactly. This is his parenting voice coming out. So the other day I was teaching Anna to play ping pong, and I found myself repeating something I tell the kids a lot when we do these kinds of sporty things, which is what I said earlier: keep your eye on the ball. Because they have a tendency, I don't know if you've experienced this, but they either flinch because a ball is coming towards you, so you instead of looking to catch it, you look away and then it hits you in the face, or they get overexcited and they just kind of flail aimlessly. And I think that's the point of this passage too. You have to keep your eyes where the action is, where you can actually make a difference, because it's so easy to look away. So the Jews were in exile because of the actions of past generations. That's a truth. That's a biblical truth that Ezekiel himself expresses. But that seems to have led to this fatalistic, blame-shifting, almost nihilistic attitude that left them thinking, whatever I do won't matter. It's all doom and gloom anyway. What's the point of living righteously? It doesn't even matter. I didn't put myself in this situation. Other people were bad. Now I'm suffering the consequences, and I'm stuck here. And this like cloud of sorrow and doom and judgment that they feel from God. And so it seems like they're not taking personal responsibility. And Ezekiel wants to tell them the good news that God will save them, God will deliver them. But first, he has to get them to understand their own relationship with God and that they have this accountability to God. And I love that statement back there in the passage that we read, that all souls are God. He wants them to know every person belongs to God. Each person creates a life out of their own unique relationship with the one they belong to. And it actually doesn't matter whether you know you belong to him or not. You belong to him. And so, evangelism, or what Ezekiel's trying to do to bring them back, restoration of these people, starts sometimes by helping people to see you belong to someone. You live your life in relationship with someone, and you alone are personally accountable for your own choices in relationship to him. Are we affected by our parents' choices? Yes. I'm affected by my parents' choices. You're affected by your parents' choices. The exiles were affected by past generations. Our grandparents, our great-grandparents, it goes down. Sometimes there are things that have been done that affect us. And that's what passages like Exodus 20 and verse 5 tell us. And that's right there in the Ten Commandments. And God says not to worship idols, or the consequences will be passed down from generation to generation. There's a difference between consequences getting passed down and guilt being passed down.
Yeah.
If one generation worships idols, their kids probably will too, and multiple generations will suffer. My addictions, my attitudes, my sinful ways of dealing with conflict, whatever I have going on, all can harm my kids and maybe even their kids, but my guilt isn't on them. I can make it easier. I can make it harder for them to choose the best way, but I can't take away their choice, their opportunity to do good or to do evil. So are we responsible for our children's choices? And that's the tough question, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes and no. We'll be held accountable for the choices we've made that affected their choices, the choices we've made to protect them, to guide them. Of course, this whole series, the training wheels thing we're doing, wouldn't make any sense without this belief that we have a responsibility. We talked about momentum. We talked about how we can give them this inertia to live a good life. But we have to embrace this other truth that we can't control their choices. And our job is to keep establishing influence on their choices. And there's so many ways that we do that as parents, good, healthy ways, without manipulating or being weird about it. We give them clear directions. We give them consistent consequences. It's like classic behavior design, right? We're designing their behavior by what we tell them, what happens when they make a good choice, what happens when they make a bad choice. And then, of course, through a meaningful relationship with them where they value what we say and think, they want to make us proud. We try to bring every influence we can, every positive, every constructive influence we can to try to make them into the people that they need to be. And that's our job. That's what we're responsible for.
Yeah, it just reminds me of that phrase, another familiar phrase, maybe that we're more used to saying, I'm rubber, you're glue, whatever you say bounces off of me and sticks to you.
Been a while.
That sort of deflection, I think, is something that we do a whole lot in our lives. We just want to look for somebody else being the evil one or the one responsible for all of the pain and suffering that I'm going through. And this proverb and God's response to it is really God holding up the fact that you cannot blame shift like you're trying to do. And we all want to do it. We've all tried to do it. I think every one of us have looked at someone else as being the responsible party, that if they would have just done a different thing, then we wouldn't have suffered the consequences of it. And like he brings up the father here, who is such a great father. He's such an upright man, follows the law, stands out as a model believer. But God says that he's going to live. And then right after that, he talks about his son. Okay, he's got a son. He's a scoundrel. He's a murderer. He's an adulterer. His blood is on himself, though, not his father. He's responsible. The son is responsible for his own sins. And, I think this discussion here, I think it's the natural conclusion of what we see there in Deuteronomy 6, where you find God emphasizing how important it is for fathers and mothers to teach their kids. You have such an important role in leading your kids. And you might find yourself thinking that if your kids don't turn out the way that you want them to or the way that God wants them to, then it's your failure. It's your fault. And you're the one to blame. And it's so easy to blame ourselves as parents because, like we've talked about on previous episodes, this job of parenting is something we take very seriously. But we all have a role in this relationship. Ultimately, our children have a role in their responsibility of doing what they've been taught to do. We have a role in, like you talked about, planting and watering, just being the ones who guide and shepherd them. We have a job. They have a job. We all have jobs, and we cannot turn around and blame each other for failing in the jobs that we're responsible for doing ourselves. And so he says here in Ezekiel 18, verse 4 that you already read, the soul who sins shall die. So do I blame my parents for how I turned out? Do I blame myself for how my daughter is turning out? God doesn't blame anyone who is doing their best. He only blames the people who are guilty, and they're the ones who he holds accountable. And so that's the question I need to be asking, not do I blame myself for somebody else's choices? Do I blame myself for my choices? And if I can confidently say I've done everything that I could, well then I don't think God's going to hold anything against me either.
Yeah, and I think that these scenarios that he plays out here with each one of these lists of deeds that each person does, I think the most encouraging out of all of them is when he gets to the paragraph about the person who is wicked and you're thinking, okay, it's over for him.
Yeah.
But then it says, and he turns and decides to do good.
Right.
And he will live. It's not like, when God says your deeds are defining your outcome, whether you live or die, he's not saying you have to have been perfect your whole life. He's saying, actually, what you do next matters. What
Right.
are you going to do now? And that's really encouraging. Again, change is possible. It's about what you decide to do with the rest of your life.
I think that leads into our third segment here on the episode really nicely, actually. And that is our reach out question.
Reach out and touch
Someone.
So there's a lot of things that we've talked about here about looking forward and what we do next. And I think where we are going with this is leading to this question that we're going to ask each other here on the episode.
Yeah, the reach out question is, what regrets do you have as a parent? And you get to go first.
Oh, goody. So, yeah, I mean, looking back, there's a lot of things we can think about that we regretted. And I don't have any regrets, but I definitely have regrets. I don't know if you ever seen
tattoos?
the people who get the tattoos with no regrets, but I do have regrets. There are things that I wish I would have done differently. And in the sea of all of those things, I'll just pick out one here. There have been times where I think back to my childhood and I remember how much my parents made an opening, an opportunity to be involved with other kids and other people's families. And I remember, you and a lot of our friends when we were younger who made opportunities for people to be around each other and get to know each other in the church. And it was such a small thing, but I think it gave us all space to develop these relationships, to get to know each other. And thinking about my responsibility in my home, I think I could have done a better job opening up our home for more kids to come over and play, for more opportunities for Ashlyn to get involved with other people. I mean, the pandemic aside, a lot of Ashlyn's peers have either moved away or they're kind of off in their own friend groups, like families and other things like that. Maybe they live kind of farther away. It's been a challenge for, I think, Ashlyn to get involved with other kids her own age at church because, everybody's spread out and people are always so busy. And I haven't really made as much of an opportunity to get kids together early on in her life than maybe I should have. And so it's definitely not too late for that. As you were just talking about, it's what you do next. So there's always things that I can be doing better moving forward in the future, but definitely something I regret maybe not doing sooner in her life.
I appreciate that you chose something really specific like that, which is something I didn't do when I was thinking about this. But I'm encouraged by that idea to do more of that myself. And as the kids, especially as they get closer to that junior high age, whenever it's just like, man,
things
your
are changing,
peers
man.
Really, your friends are what defines so much of how you view your life and how things are going. There's nothing in particular that I was thinking that I wish I didn't do or I wish I did do. The word that comes to mind is more. It feels like there's more I could have done, more personal attention, more spiritual dialogue, more going out and doing things like visiting or serving people together. I've taken them over the years several times to do certain things that I wish I would have done more of. We went to a hospital and just prayed with people, me and Anna. We used to go a lot more with the kids to visit some of the brethren who are shut in and bring gifts to them. And there's just a lot that I feel like I could have done more of. We haven't always been consistent with family devotionals. We're kind of stop and start with them. I could have made more time. It's just like the personal attention to them,
Sure.
which is something that is kind of a theme with me right now. And then this personal attention to their development, their spiritual development and their growth in other ways as well. I could have been at scouts or throwing a ball more or cooking together or just a lot of things that we do some, but we could do more. And on the one hand, you don't want to beat yourself up because most of us are really trying to do a hard job well. And you think, well, man, there isn't a lot of room for some of this stuff. But the value of the question is that, as you said, we're still in a place, for one thing, that where we can inch forward. We can do better tomorrow. And also, I think maybe others can learn from my regrets or from these conversations about regrets as we talk with each other, even those with grown kids, as they share their regrets. And I've had some of those conversations with people. It has really been instructive to me. And it's not regrets like crushing. I mean, often these are people who have very faithful, wonderful children, but they're saying, this is what I wish I would have done differently. And that's always helpful. So I've been trying lately to give a little more time and attention, building those bonds, developing them, and it's been good. But I think that there's just value in these kinds of conversations.
Well, I mean, I think anyone listening right now can just put themselves right into all the things that you've just said. I mean, I totally agree with that myself. I could always be doing more. There's more that I could be doing in a lot of areas. And I love the point that you were making too about how, sometimes you get this view of parents as being like super parents, or they figured it all out and like their kids are faithful and yeah, they did the job, right? But I think if you were to ask a lot of them this same question, like what regrets do you have as a parent? I think almost everyone is going to find something. They're going to find some opportunity to say, I could have done more, I could have done better, I could have done this or that or not done this other thing or whatever it is. That is just the growth mindset, right? That is what we do. Yeah. When we're trying to push forward and become better tomorrow, we look back at what we did yesterday and we say, oh man, there's a lot I could change here. There's a lot I could do better or more or differently or whatever it is. And that's what pushes us in a lot of cases to keep going forward. So I don't know. I think this conversation fits nicely with the idea of goal setting and focusing on our priority and our purpose as parents.
Yeah. It's goal setting and growth mindset go really well together. And just, I think we both are acknowledging with that answer how hard the work of parenting is, which I think leads well into the challenge for this week.
I am ready to face any challenges that might be foolish enough to face me.
And this week's challenge is to thank a parent for their work with their children. It's easy to forget because we all are just deep in it. Those of us who are parents or those who are kids don't think about it at all, it seems. Mm-hmm. But our lives are enriched every day by that hard work that parents put in. I'm thankful for the work that Pam and Dale put in on you, Brian, for the work
they
that
did a
Mike
good job.
They did an outstanding job. I got to watch a lot of that as you were growing up. I'm thankful for my wife's parents and just the outstanding job and the somewhat magical childhood, as I think of it, that she had, and just the person that she became under their blessing and their training, and all of the parents pouring themselves into shaping their little ones right now are blessing the world, both now and in the future, by the work they're putting in. And I just think it's just such an important job that is shaping the world. I mean, if the family is the basic unit of a culture or a civilization, of a society, then you have to think that parenting is one of the most important jobs we have. So I doubt any kids thank their parents nearly as much as they deserve. So let's add our thanks to the mix this week and go up to a parent and thank them for the work that they're doing with their children.
Whatever you want somebody to do to you, you go ahead and do that for somebody else. I think that's a nice way to wrap that up. Okay, so let's close this thing out with a closing prayer. And the suggested prayer in the study guide that, oh, by the way, you can go download in the show notes for this episode. The suggested prayer is, Dear Father, provide the increase as I plant and water in my children's lives. And of course, that comes from 1 Corinthians 3, verses 6 and 7. We have touched on that verse a whole lot here in the episode. So let's incorporate that in our own prayer as we close this thing out. Let's pray. Holy Father, thank you so much for our time together in this conversation, to think together about our goals as parents. Be merciful toward us as we do our best to model a life of faithfulness and holiness for our children. Shepherd us as we shepherd them. Shape our minds, our hearts, our actions, and our relationships so that we can shape theirs. Create in our children a fertile soil and help to give us courage to trust that you'll provide the increase in their lives. Help us see how our journey toward heaven is within our control, and give us perspective when we become discouraged over the choices that others make. We love you with everything that we have, and help us to reflect that love in our homes every day. In Jesus' name we offer this prayer. Amen.
Amen.
All right, so our 8th guided study session in our Training Wheels series is teaching moments. We're going to talk a whole lot about all these little day-to-day moments that we have opportunity to teach our kids. Maybe you're not going to sit in front of a giant whiteboard with your children's rapt attention staring at you as you drone on and on maybe about things. Maybe your opportunities to teach are just little tiny moments throughout the day.
They pass by quick if you don't catch them. We've noticed that when we've missed them, and then we've noticed sometimes when we catch them, and they're important to watch for.
Yeah, they just seem to fly by, and they never seem to come back again. So just use the opportunities when you can. So we'll talk about that on the next conversation. And in preparation for that, it would be helpful if you would read Luke chapters 4, verses 1 to 13, Deuteronomy 6, verses 1 to 25, and Romans 2, verses 17 to 29. Looking forward to that conversation because, there are so many opportunities, and those moments just keep coming every single day.
Yeah, and I think Deuteronomy 6 is kind of the heart of that conversation.
Yeah.
So encourage everybody to take a look at that, those verses there.
As you walk by the way, as you lie down, as you rise, it's going to be fun. So thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in to the Bible Geeks podcast. You can find show notes for this episode in your podcast player of choice or at BibleGeeks.fm/146. Feel free to share these conversation starters that we've been dropping here throughout the weeks with a friend. We'd love to have you let somebody else know who might be a parent or might not be what we've been up to here. And you can find all of the downloadable printable study guides that we've done so far there on our website at BibleGeeks.fm/trainingwheels. All the resources will be there once the whole series is done. We'll have a giant downloadable PDF you can print out and have these conversations on your own. And until next week, everyone, may the Lord bless you and keep you.
Shalom.